Okay, so today we're going to be talking about what's called diffuse material properties. So what I'm going to do is set my project to our lecture project. And then if you go in the scenes file, there are two different Maya files in there. What we're going to be doing here is using number 2 called materials. This already has the light set up, and we're just going to be using that through the rest of the month. We're going to keep adding new materials to new objects like glass. We'll talk about layered materials. So we're going to be building off this one like for the rest of the month. So we're going to do number 2 materials. Just open that up. Okay, so it looks kind of like this. We've got a couple of basic lights. You know, we've got our dome light in the background, rectangular area light. This is a disc area light. And there's already a camera set up, but if you kind of look through the camera, you can see roughly what we're looking at. It's just looking at a few different props that we're going to be making some materials for. So let's just try rendering this, just to, again, kind of get used to the rendering process, because you guys are still kind of newer with RenderMan. If we want to see what this scene looks like, remember we have two different options. We could either do the render current frame or the IPR. Now remember, when you do the render current frame, this is the one where you can't right click, and so you can't pick your camera. So you guys remember how you had to look through the render cam in that lighting project just to get it to render. So if you're looking through the right camera, render cam, and you hit that button there on the left, you should see the image tool start doing its thing. It'll pop up. And there we go. So it's just kind of showing us what the project looks like in its current state. And there's nothing really fancy going on in here. I mean, you can see the lights are working, but they're all basically just kind of a default gray, diffuse color. There's nothing really too crazy going on. No textures, bump. Nothing's reflective yet. So I'm going to hit escape and cancel that. When you guys were doing the lighting project, were a lot of you doing the IPR? Was that kind of your go-to for that? Or were you kind of just doing full screen renders like over and over again? Kind of both? Yeah, if you want to use IPR, we can do that as well. I'm probably going to use that in a little bit once we start like fine-tuning things, like moving colors around. But this is the one that's going to allow us to move sliders and just watch it auto-update as we're working on something. So the material that we're going to kind of focus on today is called the Pixar surface. So what I want us to do is just go in the Hypershade. We're going to load this guy up. Now, there's a couple things that I kind of want you guys just to see if it gives you any issues. But so in the Hypershade, you know how there's a lot of different little windows and pieces to it? Do all of you still have that material viewer in the top right? Yeah, like, come on, this guy, which apparently is already broken. That made it no time at all. That's wonderful. It's dead. Okay. Completely dead. I don't know if you guys are seeing anything in yours or not, if it's showing like the shader ball, but yeah. Is it going to work? Oh, okay. Now, I'm fine with you guys using this thing and kind of looking at it. Like, ideally, of course, we'd want to see the material if we're working on it. For some reason, though, when Shane and I were kind of going through this thing, when we were like building all the materials, it felt like every 5 minutes or so after working in a file, this thing would just break. You start getting error messages, and this thing would stop responding altogether. So I'm gonna leave it up, but don't be surprised if like midway through this thing, the material viewer just like starts breaking on me, and I'm just gonna close out of it and pretend like this doesn't even need, it's not even there. But if you want to in the material viewer, if you click on a material, like over here in the Hypershade, if you're in the lecture project, you'll notice there's a Lambert, which is like the default Lambert you guys see in every file. There's another one called neutral gray. This is a Pixar surface material. And it looks like a Lambert. It is gray, even though my little swatch isn't loading right now. Sometimes if you notice the little preview on a material doesn't show up, you can right click and do refresh swatch. Sometimes it works. Mine's kind of being weird. It'll click in here eventually once I kind of get farther in the project. But and then over here in the material viewer, you could, if you want, change through these guys and figure out which one of these little presets you want to use to view everything. But I'm going to kind of scale this down a little bit. There we go. We'll see how quickly that breaks. I'm going to give it about 5 minutes. All right. So we're going to make our first material here. I like my partially transparent Hypershade. That's lovely. Really, Hypershade? Yeah, I did. 5 minutes was apparently being too generous. Yeah, there we go. So we're going to make our first material here. What I want you guys to do, if you are in the Hypershade, you all know about this little like creation area. That's probably still on the left side of your Hypershade. And under RenderMan, you can see all the different materials they have. And they've changed this quite a bit over the last year or so. They used to have one called like the Disney shader. That's kind of gone away. They've replaced that with something called the Pixar surface. They got a hair shader, a layered material, some constant colors, a volume shader, like doing fog effects. But we're going to be focusing on Pixar surface. So if you want, just kind of click where it says PXR surface. And you should notice that in the Hypershade at the top, a new material has appeared. Are you guys seeing the swatch? Is it drawing it for you? Or is it showing, kind of doing what mine's doing, where it's not really showing you anything? Yeah. Again, like probably in about 20 minutes, you're going to see Maya just start creating these things out of nowhere. But there does seem to be a little bit of a delay with it creating the RenderMan ones. It'll still render fine, but the little preview may not show up for a bit. Now, if you click on the Pixar surface, actually down in the node graph, you'll probably see that there is one somewhere here. Looks like this. Here's the node. How do you guys feel about like navigating through this whole node section? Do you know how to like remove nodes from it, add nodes to the graph things out? Let's just try doing a couple just as a refresher, because I know navigating this can be a little bit tricky. So at the moment, do you guys have the same thing I've got where there's probably two different materials kind of hanging out? Yeah. Or at least one of them's down there? Okay, we want to wipe this out and just remove the materials, but I don't want to delete them. Right? We still want them in the project. I just don't want to see them down here in the node graph. So at the top of the node graph is a little icon that looks like a bunch of twinkling stars. That's called clear graph. Hit that. You should notice that the nodes disappear, but they're not gone. They're still in the file. You're just not looking at them down here. Now, if I wanted to add, let's say, that new Pixar surface material to the node graph, what are some ways I could do that? There's a lot of ways to do it. Yeah, you guys remember the right click, and you're probably doing that graph network, right? Graph network. And if you do that, there it is. And we got the material and this thing called a shading group. Now, there are other ways to add materials to the network. Let's say, click on a tab at the top. Let's find like a light. Okay, so go to your lights tab. I love how these aren't even drawing the preview. 2018 cannot come soon enough. Click on like the dome light. We'll just select that. Okay, when you select a node, because you know how every time you graph a material, it puts it down here, but then you lose the previous material? It's almost like restarting it from scratch. Like for example, if I said like I want to see this neutral gray material or the Lambert, I could do that and graph the network, but see how the other one disappeared? Sometimes you want to have a lot of different things in the node graph at once. Now to do that, you could shift click multiple materials, like I could do both, and if I hit that button right there on the right, or sorry, on the left, called graph input connections, that will put both. If I do graph input and output, this also puts both in there somewhere. Whoops, there we go. Let me clear it again. But let's say we have something like this in here, and then if I go to the lights tab, I just want to add one node to it. Just add one thing we've already created. If you click on the Pixar dome light, you'll see next to clear graph, there are individual buttons for adding one node to the graph. So if I click this one with that selected, There's the dome light. Here's my key light. Add it. The key light's here. And likewise, you can click on one of these guys and hit the button next to it, which is remove node. This guy right here. That will remove whatever you've selected. So that's going to make it a little bit easier for you to kind of like control what you're seeing at any given point. Now, one other thing that's going to really help us out here is using multi-tabs. When you guys were doing shading and lighting, did Tony ever have you click on any of these buttons right here, this little plus? Has anyone done it on their own, just out of curiosity? Okay. This is going to change your world. Because the Hypershade, remember, again, with shading and lighting, how you guys were probably graphing something out constantly, and every time you'd graph it, it's a completely different layout, and then you're trying to decipher what you just did last time? Yeah, that's annoying, right? The cool thing about this new Hypershade, and this started in 2016, is you can make a different tab for multiple materials. So let's try this out. Where it says Untitled, double-click on the name Untitled. Let's rename this to Test. This is going to be our test area. This is where we're playing around with things. Eventually, you guys are going to want to do like a final material for something, like build a copper material, building a wood material for something you're doing. If you hit the little plus symbol next to it, watch what happens. These are individual tabs. This means what I could do is we could make a new name for this, and we could graph a material in it. And if you want to like work on a new material, you would just make a new tab, put a new material in there. So you could potentially go back and forth between two different materials, and you would never lose anything. They're always hanging out in the graph. And you can close them. So I'm going to try like making a new tab. I'll call this pulley material, because the pulley is in the scene. We're eventually going to do that guy, just like you're going to do in the lab. So I have a pulley material, which means if I wanted to, like let's just kind of pretend this Pixar surface material is going to be my pulley material. If you're on the pulley material tab and you right click over that Pixar surface to graph network, there it is. But it's always going to be here. So if I go back to the test area, I can do some other stuff, come right back to it. Nothing's going away. If you close out of the Hypershade, close down Maya, go back inside of it, look what's still there. So it's a really good way to kind of keep your scene organized. Now, obviously, if you guys got like an environment with 100 projects or 100 different materials, I wouldn't recommend making 100 tabs for every material. Like that's going to be impossible to navigate through. But you can still do it for some of the important ones. Okay, let me kind of clear this out. What I want you to do is just graph that new Pixar surface material in our first tab called Test, or if you haven't renamed it, it's called Untitled. And let's also rename the material. And you can do this a couple ways. If you kind of see it graphed out, you can click right where it says Pixar surface. This will rename it. You could call this Test material. Or if you guys like doing your little shortcuts, if you do hold down Control, if you Control double click on a node at the top, Control double click will bring up a rename node shortcut, and then you can rename it that way. So I would really recommend naming everything as you kind of go. All right, let's assign this to the pulley. Actually, no, let's put on this guy right in the back. So when you assign the material, you can either do it through right-clicking on the object. Is this how you're doing it before? Like the right-click, assign existing, and digging through that stuff? Come on. This thing. You can right-click and assign existing material and pick our test material. Or if you guys like doing it through the Hypershade, if you have the object selected, usually what I do is when I have something selected that I want, I'll just right-click on the node and do assign material to selection. So again, I'm just like clicking on that object, holding down my right mouse button on the test material, and doing assign material to selection. But either way, just make sure that's on there. And then what I want you to do is just click on the test material, load up the attributes, and let's just kind of look at what we're seeing here. So this is the Pixar surface. And if you look at it, does this kind of remind you of any other material you've done before? Yeah, you all remember the MIA material X passes with mental ray? Or I guess you guys did MIA material X. It's the same thing. These are called architectural shaders. They're really what it is think of it as like this one giant material that for the most part can do like almost every single material property you can think of. There might be a couple exceptions. There is a hair shader that's a little bit better. There's a different volumetric shader that Pixar uses, but for 99% of the stuff you would need, this guy can do it. And you can kind of see it's broken down into different sections. We have an area called Diffuse. I'm sure you already kind of know what that is. That's just like your basic texture color. It's just set to a gray. And then if you kind of go a little bit farther down, you'll see there's bump connections for Diffuse. I'll close that out of the advanced. And then we have all these specular areas like primary spec, rough spec, clear coats, like for car paint, iridescence, fuzz. Like it just keeps going. There's scatter in here for skin. So they're constantly adding more and more stuff to it. We can even do glow if we wanted to, make something glow and light up the scene. So it's a really, really cool material. Do you guys all have that assigned to this one? Okay, just go in there. Let's make sure it works. So go to your diffuse color on the material. Change it to anything different, just not gray, because I want to make sure it shows up in the render. Pick something much different. Like I'm going pink again. And then, do you guys remember how to do the regional renders? How we kind of crop stuff? Just as a refresher, because let's say we want to only render this one part. There's a crop button in the image tool, this guy right here. Hit that, and then just marquee drag over the part of the render you want. And then hit R. And that will cause it to regional render only that area. So remember R is to like refresh the render. Just remember R refresh or R render. That will kind of make it update if you're changing something. Is everyone seeing the color on their material? Isn't it beautiful? So realistic. But obviously if we put a texture on it, that should show up totally fine. RenderMan's kind of doing its thing, rendering this guy. So what we kind of want to get into today is really just figuring out, well, when I assign something, how do I get the texture to load in there, and how do I get this to eventually match the reference? So we're going to treat this just like the lab. Now on this model right here, we're going to try making a new material for it and then getting our pulley texture connected. So what I want you guys to do is go to your new tab. Remember, I made a new tab over here called pulley material. I want you to make a brand new Pixar surface from scratch. And remember too, you can use tab in the Hypershade and type stuff in. Pixar surface. Oh, one thing too I forgot to show you is you can also make these up at the top. See that little like thing looks like a star, the red ball? There's the Pixar surface right there. So this whole like RenderMan menu, this has the materials too. It's not just lights. So if you right click on the materials button, you could make a Pixar surface right from here. And that will also appear in the Hypershade. So it is a bunch of ways to make the same thing. All right, on this guy, let's rename this pulley material. And I want you to assign this material to the pulley model. So put that material on that guy. And again, just to make sure that it did assign, change the color to something else. Since the pulley's blue, maybe go to the color, pick a blue color. Just make sure you see it when you render it. So see how my crop needs to be moved over? I'm just going to slide it down. You can grab the edges and the pulley's right around here. And I'm going to hit R just to re-render it. Yeah, there we go. I can bring that in a little bit. So there's my beautiful pulley. Is everyone still seeing like the color update? So now that one has something happening to it? Okay. So now that we've got this new shader on there, let's try getting our texture working. So where do you think the texture would probably go? Like your scraper texture, your pulley texture? Yeah, diffuse color. So next to that little color right there, you could do a couple ways to do this. You can either build the file node in the Hypershade first and then connect it to the attribute, or what you guys were probably doing with Tony is you were hitting that little connection box next to what you want to connect it to. So we'll do it that way first. So find your color attribute, hit the little checker button next to the slider. This guy is going to pop up, and we are going to pick a file node. Okay, did you guys see that the file node appeared in the node graph? It should be right next to your material. I'm just going to move that over a little bit. Now on the file node, you kind of click it. You can see on the attributes, it wants to read something. It's not loading anything yet. So when you click on the file node, hit that little folder next to image name and load in the pulley texture. So what I did, let me kind of back up. So if you're looking at the material, you probably have yours set to some color right now. Hit the little checker button next to color. And that's going to bring up the create render node window. And then under 2D textures, you're just hitting file. And just to kind of let you guys know, RenderMan does have their own files. Because their whole section is pretty deep. You go in here, there's they got their own bump nodes. I mean, you guys all remember the bump 2D from Maya, like making it, more bumpy, less bumpy. They got all these different patterns like checkers and whirly and Brownian. I mean, there's a ton of stuff in here. The only reason why we're not really going through these right now is because a lot of these, while they do render fine, you know how you kind of want to see stuff in the viewport to preview what's going on? These don't preview in the viewport at this point. So I just don't want you creating these and seeing your viewport turn black and then wondering why nothing's working, even though it would totally look fine. But later on, maybe it might be fixed. Do you have the newer RenderMan chain? Did you grab that one yet? Do you know if these still have the same problem where they don't preview? Yeah, okay. Yeah. Basically, the problem is because the viewport's a Maya thing. It's just RenderMan's nodes don't want to preview in Maya's viewport. But I would expect probably in at some point for Maya 2018, they're probably going to address this because this is a pretty big thing they need to get working. So we're going to kind of skip over those guys, and we're going to try to use a lot of the Maya textures as much as possible. So again, just make sure you have a file node connected to color, and then use the folder. Find the pulley texture. Just like you guys eventually are going to find your texture and scraper texture for the lab. We're going to load that in. And then we are going to render it. So hit R, re-render that section. Let's make sure we see it. Did you guys all see the pulley texture appear? Amazing. So it's loading the texture. So this is pretty simple at this point. Now, there are a couple of things that we want to do to the file node. And I'd maybe make a note of this because there's one set of attributes that we need to add to every file node to be able to change color space. This is a little more complicated because we didn't really talk about it much with you guys because RenderMan doesn't really have the same problems that Mendelray used to have. When you guys were saving renders out of the image tool, did anyone save it out as a JPEG or a Targa when you did the lighting project? Did you guys see what happened to the render when you did that? Did you see it was insanely dark? Probably. Yeah. There's a lot of these weird things happening with the render view or the image tool where it's basically gamma correcting your image so it looks correct for your monitor. I don't want to get too deep into it because this is a really in-depth discussion, but what you kind of have to remember is that everything you're seeing in front of you on your monitor is being artificially changed so it looks correct for you. Like the math and the numbers behind the scene are different compared to what you're seeing. So it's called color management and color spaces, but when you're working with Maya file nodes on a RenderMan material, occasionally the file node won't look right. Like it might look too dark, it might look washed out. And you can see on the file node, there is something called color space. When I was doing mental ray lectures, this was normally what we would change. We just go in there, change the color space if it looked wrong, and that would fix it. But RenderMan, this doesn't respond. This doesn't actually change anything for RenderMan. So with RenderMan on the file node, we need to add a few attributes to this thing. So let's all try this out. Make sure we can all do this. Click on your file node, and at the top where it says attributes, you guys all see that RenderMan section. Click on your file node, go to the top of your attributes, see the attributes drop-down menu. See where it says right here? I'm on the file node. Is everyone seeing that? Okay. Go to where it says RenderMan, and you're going to do add texture controls. What that does, you can see how it changed immediately. See how bright that is out of nowhere? Okay. Scroll down on your file node, and you'll notice that there is a new section at the bottom. It just added these to the file node. They were just hidden. So we're basically exposing these so we can see them. Now what I want you to do is try rendering this again. Now that you've added those. Just hit R, redo the render, and watch the texture. See how that looks wrong? It's like, well, that ain't good. Why is he telling me to do this? It's because once we enable this thing, we can now control what the texture is doing, if it's in the right color space or if it is not. Now, at the moment, you can tell that does not look right? That looks kind of washed out. Because you all know what the texture looks like. You just saw it a second ago. And if you're in question, like, look at your image. This is the texture file. Clearly, that is not the same. This is not just a light issue. It's something's going on where it looks washed out. So what you're going to do when you add those RenderMan controls, at the bottom, hit that checkbox called Linearize sRGB. And then redo it again and watch what happens to the texture. See how it's different again? So this was before I did linearize. This was after. And I know, like, you guys saw this was working before I even did any of those controls. Like, it actually looked okay the first time. But I kind of want to get you guys in the habit of adding this to every file node, just so you don't kind of sort of lose track of not doing that. Because there are going to be some cases where we do want to keep this off. So just kind of remember, every time you guys make a file node at the top, add the controls, and then turn that on every time. Now, we are going to change that in just a little bit, where we're going to do this on another file node and turn it off. But for now, we're going to leave that guy on. Everyone good so far? Okay. Yes. Do you have the controls up? Okay. So you click in your file node, and then you have the attributes up on it. Okay. So at the top, do you see where it says the attributes drop down? Click on that. You should see RenderMan. And then do add texture controls. And now scroll down and look for the RenderMan section at the way bottom. And open that up. And the only thing you're doing is turning on that one checkbox right there. Linearize sRGB. And I'm probably going to do a video about this, explaining why we're doing this. But this is going to be something really important for any of you guys that do compositing. Do you guys know what sRGB means? Or if you heard someone say like raw color space, linear, or logarithmic space, Cineon? Yeah, kind of. Yeah, it's because colors and numbers are all kind of the same thing. when you'll probably have seen this before. Like sometimes when you view an image in the wrong format, they kind of look washed out, like stuff like this, where like the same image, depending on how the color space is set, just looks different on your monitor. Because like the monitor has its own settings, a projector has its own settings. When you go to a movie theater, those projectors have their own settings. So it's more about making sure that your file is formatted properly so it looks correct on whatever you're viewing it on. So it's a pretty deep conversation, but if anyone knows they're going to get into compositing and you want like the 30-minute rundown where I just kind of go to town explaining it, I'm more than happy to sit down with you guys one-on-one and explain it because it's a little deep. Now, what you're looking at right here, this is what we would call a diffuse material property. The most common thing. What would you guys say that is? If you had to explain this to someone that doesn't do CG, or like your mom, she's like, what does diffuse mean? What would you say diffuse is? What's diffuse color? Yeah. It looks like flat texture color, but it's not just flat color. It's also the flat texture color and how it reacts with the light, right? Because if I turned off the lights, what's going to happen to that texture? It's going to go black. Yeah, it needs lights to really do anything. So it's the interaction of your texture and the lights around it. So texture and lights multiply together. That's what we end up with. This is a diffuse material property. So from here, like let's say you're trying to match the reference. Hopefully it'd be pretty close just by loading it in there, but there are a couple things that you might need to fix. One, we may find out that your texture looks too bright or too dark. Now, you guys aren't going to want to go back in Photoshop and make it brighter and darker every time it doesn't match. So we want to try to change the intensity right inside of Maya. And there are two different ways to do this. And I'll let you guys pick which way you like better. On the material, if you look at the material, see where that diffuse connection is, and there's a gain slider? Fade gain down. See what's happening to my little shader ball? I'm actually amazed this is still even working, honestly. This is our new record chain. We've made it 10 minutes. What's that doing to the texture color? Just by fading that back. It's just darkening it. Makes it darker and darker and darker. And if you render it, it will look darker. Let's see if I can go above 1 with this. If I type it above 1, it'll make it brighter. I could type in 10. That's very bright. This actually looks closer to what your texture looks like, because yours is a lot brighter than mine. Go back to 1 again. So this is going to be your intensity if you want to fade it out that way. So going below 1 will darken it, above 1 will make it brighter. That's doing it on the material. Your other option is if you go to the file node, see how the file node is showing this little like out color, like a green line? It's taking the color from the file, and if you follow it, look where it's going into. Diffuse color in the material. That's where we connected it. But if you go to the file node, and actually, I'll show you a cool trick here. Oh, see what the material's doing? Oh, it's black in the viewport. Can't see it. Hit the S button on that file node. And hit the texture button. Is everyone seeing the texture showing up? Let me try to turn that off. So the weird thing about the render band materials is if the texture button is off, it just shows up black. But if you turn that texture button on in the viewport, which is also the 6 key on your keyboard, if you hit 6, you should see it show up in there. It looks okay. But that S button right there, that's the way to force that specific node to show up in the viewport, which is really, really handy when you're doing other textures. Like I could preview a spec file, a transparency map, just by hitting the S button on that node, and it will appear there. But what I'm kind of getting at here is since this file node is going to the diffuse color, if you click on the file node, look for the area called color balance. You'll see there's a bunch of different sliders like color gain, color offset, alpha gain, alpha offset. Do any of you guys remember what these are doing? I don't know if you had to did you play around with these very much with shading and lighting? Probably not. Okay. All these are multiply and addition sliders. So for example, we're doing out color. So the two sliders we're doing are color gain and color offset. Now, if this was using an alpha channel for something, like if I had this alpha channel going to, I don't know, transparency or roughness, I would use the alpha sliders here. But watch this. If you hit the S button, you guys will probably see that shows up in the material viewer. You should see like a little 2D preview of the texture. And this S, by the way, stands for solo, as in like Han Solo. So hit that. Rest in peace. Too soon, sorry. Hit that, and then bring the color gain down and watch that texture. What's this doing? Darkening, right? And if I look at the viewer, let's see if see how it's changing in the viewport as well. So this means when you guys do this, both ways will work. I don't care if you fade down the gain right on the material to darken it, or if you go to the texture file and drop the color gain down, that's the exact same thing. But all you're doing when you're in the lab is when you load in that reference, immediately, once you see your textures in there, use the color gain or the gain on the material up and down until it matches the intensity of the reference. You're just getting your texture to look right. So that's pretty straightforward. Now we get to the slightly more complicated part. All right, let's all save this because we're on a roll here. Because I'm feeling like something's going to crash at some point. So far, so good. So what are some other things that we would maybe need to do to color? Because we're not going to be doing any like specularity yet. So aside from the intensity and just making sure the texture looks good, what else do you think we might need for like the color part of the material? Yeah, like roughness, or really just getting like those surface imperfections. You guys all remember doing like bump maps and normal maps, like breaking things up. What I want to do is get it so with the pulley that all these little details of the paint pop up off the metal. That's like a bump map. A normal map would do the same thing. So we're going to make a bump map. Now, when you guys did bump maps before, you were probably doing it in Photoshop. You all take out your color file, turn it black and white, and then just load that in Maya, right? Now, we could do this in Photoshop and turn it black and white, but if you kind of think about it, couldn't we just do this in Maya? Like, Maya can do a lot, right? We know Maya does too much, honestly, but Maya can do a lot. I think we can find a way in Maya to take that color file and turn it black and white. We're not asking very much out of this. So we're not going to use Photoshop. I want to do a lot of this stuff inside of Maya, and there's a couple of benefits to doing it that way. One, it means you don't have to go back in Photoshop every 2 minutes to fix it. Like, oh, it's too dark, go back to Photoshop, play with levels, save it again, reload it, re-render it, it's still wrong, go back to Photoshop. But every time you load in a different texture file, what do you think that's doing to the render or the memory? Yeah. What's that? Kind of like that. Yeah, it's basically like every texture file we load in here uses memory. So imagine you have a material where you've got 10 different black and white textures, roughness and specular and a clear coat and transparency. You can do all that, but for one material, if you're loading in 10, 20, 48 targa files for one material, and you think about what that means across the full environment, you can imagine those are going to add up real quick. And this showed up a lot as a problem for like game engines. So if any of you guys like ever kind of work with the GA side, I know you've done that a little bit. They're really big about minimizing texture memory because that slows down the engine. The game can't even run. It has a terrible frame rate. With RenderMan and any other render, it's the same thing. Most of the time it doesn't pop up as an issue, but you could run into memory problems where the render will actually just shut down on you because it can't render all the different texture files. It's too much. So we're going to do all this in Maya. So what we want to do is turn this black and white. Now the one thing that we're going to change with this is anytime we do a black and white map, I need a black and white map to have a different color space, which is this thing we were just talking about, the whole linearize. I need another file node that has that guy turned off. This only should be on for color textures. All of our black and white maps need that off. So what we're going to do is you have your file. Well, let me kind of see if this happens for you guys. It's going to be a good test for me. So let's all try this. Click on your file, do Command D. Did everyone see the duplicate pop up? Okay, so let's delete that. I want you to try another one for me. This is for my own sanity. I want to see if I'm the only one having this problem. Click on the file, and at the top of the Hypershade, go to Edit, Duplicate with Connections and Network. Now, when you hit it, watch the nodes. And I know now because I'm showing you this, it's not going to happen. Are you kidding me? Did anyone see their nodes rearrange themselves or pop? Of course not. I swear I'm not crazy. What was happening to me before is every time I would do a duplicate with connections, all these nodes would just scramble around and rearrange themselves. So apparently that's totally fine. But the advantage of you guys, when you do it with connections, again, I'll do it again. Click on the file, edit, duplicate with connections. See how it maintains the same input connections on it? Because before, when I duplicated that node, that place 2D didn't go with it, right? Do you remember what this was used for? Why you think it'd be important to have both file nodes using that same 2D placement? What is that guy? Yeah, that happened automatically. Yeah, that we didn't make that. Yeah. Yeah, like this. You guys probably haven't done a whole lot with this thing, but this is that guy where you could do a repeat UV to make it tile. You can scale and rotate textures around. It's like the free transform in Photoshop. So this means if you had, that is lovely. You have a giant blue line across your Maya, again. If you have both file nodes sharing the same placement, it means if you decide you want to rotate your texture, every single map moves with it. Alphas, bump maps, whatever you're making, all behave the same way, which we definitely want. So I'll do it one more time. File node, edit, duplicate with connections and network. Now, even if you guys, let's say you hate using the duplicate with connections, I'll do it the other way. Let's say you guys did this to Command D to duplicate it. How do you think you would still get this to share the same placement node? Yeah, well, this will be tough to figure out. Out UV to UV coordinate. How could I do this? Out UV to UV coordinate. Amazing. This one right here, don't even worry about it. This little orange one isn't used very often. It's basically the one that kind of helps it draw the little preview swatches. It's not even important. As long as you do the little out UV to UV, you're good. So this is now perfect. Okay, this is going to be the file we use for all of our black and white maps, like bump, roughness, whatever we decide. Now, one thing we're going to change with this one is when you make the duplicate file, load up the attributes. This is the guy that we want to turn linearize off. Now, because I duplicated it, you saw how those controls went with it, right? We had it turned on before, so when I duplicated it, they're still there on the duplicate. But turn off linearize. And again, I'm going to show you some notes here on basically what you're doing. This is what you guys need to write down somewhere because this is going to be a little confusing. Color files, linearize, sRGB on, duplicates, which would be black and white texture files. We're eventually going to make this black and white in a second. Those have linearize, sRGB off. So the color file is on, the duplicate is off. It's just that one checkbox. Oh, yes. Let's bring that up again. Wherever you went. Zoom in on that bad boy. And when you end up getting to like the compositing classes, Pedro and Jonathan and Juan, all those guys that work over there, they're going to get into a lot more detail about what all this stuff means, linearizing and sRGB color space. All right, everyone good with that? So color, linearize on. Our duplicate or black and white files, linearize would be off. That's all we need to worry about. Okay. So, back here, I got my file. Now, if you hit the little S on it, see how this one looks kind of washed out? Let me kind of compare the two. Here's S on my color file. Looks correct. S on this guy looks washed out. But technically, even though this one won't look right for the render, that button right there is better for the math. So the math is going to look better with this one. What we want to do is then somehow turn this to a black and white texture. So what we're going to do is right next to this guy, I want everyone to make a just simple 2D ramp texture, the basic ramp you've made before. And if you're in the creation area, it's under 2D. You all remember this guy? Ramp. Make a ramp. Again, use tab though, because it's faster. Tab, ramp. If you do tab and you're typing in ramp, you're going to see a bunch of different things pop up. The one you want is called ramp texture. That's the 2D ramp. And when you see the ramp pop up, delete the placement node. We don't even care about that. Gone. So all I need is this guy by itself. This is eventually going to be our black and white bump file. We're going to turn it black and white. So the trick here is, how do I connect these together? Okay, it's going to be kind of cool looking, but if you hit the S on the ramp, are you guys all seeing that gradient pop up? Okay, watch what happens when we do this. Hit the plus next to UV coord. You're going to see U and V get exposed. You can see them individually. Left click drag your out alpha to V coordinate. See how the ramp gradient disappeared, like something happened? It's flat. The only thing we're missing is if you go to the file node, find that color balance area again. So click on your file node, go to color balance, see that checkbox called alpha is luminance. Hit that one button and watch what happens to your ramp. I'm still looking at the ramp, by the way. Solid white. As soon as I hit that checkbox, it's a texture. Not a texture, a texture. So what is happening? It's like yeah, so what's happening here is it's using an alpha channel from the texture file. Now, the reason why like this wasn't working before I hit this is because you know how like some images have an alpha file in them? Like if you save a Targa, there could be an alpha alpha channel in the file itself. If this is off, Maya thinks there's an alpha file in the image. When you guys saved your files out of Photoshop, did you save it with an alpha file? No, you probably didn't. Yeah, it's just color. It's just some RGB texture you made. So we don't have alpha channels in them. So if this is off and Maya can't find it, that's why it's turning white. It just doesn't know what to do. So it's just, I don't know where the alpha channel is, just throw white in there. But when you turn that checkbox on, you're telling Maya to have the color be used as the alpha channel. That is triggering it to work. So again, let me kind of redo that again for you. So when you make your 2D ramp, all I did, turn that off, is on the file node, turn on alpha's luminance under color balance, and then hit the plus next to the ramp's UV coordinate, and then drag out alpha to V coordinate. Did everyone see the ramp did turn to the texture as soon as they did that? Yeah, question. Oh, like you actually see the UV lines. So that yes, that's actually awesome. Well, it's not awesome for you, but uh, when you saved your file, I bet your UV layer got converted to an alpha at some point when you're working on it. So what you would do is, yeah, it probably will still work if you turn the checkbox on. Yeah, but before that, you probably saw the UV thing, right? Yep. So it's not a big deal, but if you ever want to get rid of that, if you like ever resave your image out of Photoshop again, when that after you pick Targa, when that little window pops up saying 24-bit or 32, if you pick 24 and overwrite it, that'll fix it. Yeah. So you're good though. All right, this is our black and white texture. Now you may be kind of wondering why would we kind of do it this way, and it's probably still very confusing as to like why the ramp even did that. Like that's kind of odd. Like the ramp's just a gradient. How the hell did it turn to a texture? But watch what happens when you move the ramp color points around. Watch that little texture right there. What does this remind you of when I'm moving these around? Yep. You're looking at levels control right inside of Maya. I can now control and make my own contrast and for any texture I want that would be black and white. So I see how I have really harsh contrast with the rust and the paint. You can now figure out something really cool for like a reflection map where maybe the rust is super dark so it doesn't reflect, but the paint is really shiny, like metallic almost. So when I move these together, this makes the darks darker, right? This is making blacks even blacker. How do you think I could make the blacks lighter if I want to lift the blacks up? So this makes the whites brighter, but see how black is the same? Oh, I flip them? Here's inverting it. Kinda, yeah, kinda works doing it that way. What if, though, if we kind of put it back to black and white, instead of a black color, click on it so you can see the color slider, change the black to a gray. There's lift. Now I'm reducing contrast. I could go to the white and compress that white slider down to a gray as well. So between you like moving the points together and then also changing the color for each point, you basically have levels right inside of Maya. You're doing this in the software instead of even worrying about Photoshop at all. So let me reset this back to black and white. And by the way, there's presets over here you can pick. And that presets button at the top, you can always reset it and pick black to white, replace. There's a fun one too. Here's rainbow. That's pretty. See how like there's not any blue showing up in this one? It's a lot of like yellow and green and red. Blue will appear if you like slam these guys way over. There we go. That's awesome. I got like a heat map going on. Kind of interesting. But I mean, you could make these any color you want. So I know we're talking about black and white, but potentially you could make these whatever color range you think you want. Okay. So at this point right here, if you've got to this spot, this is going to be our black and white texture. So I want you to click where it says ramp 1 and rename this to pulley bump. This is our new bump texture. Just think of this as the same thing as you guys loading in a black and white file node from Photoshop. It's the exact same thing. But we can now play around with the value in Maya. All right, let's close that out. So what we want to do, since we have our black and white bump texture, on the material, I just want to figure out where we connect it. So when you start digging through this guy, you'll find there's a bunch of different areas where you could connect bump. So in the diffuse section, hit the little advanced area. You guys all see the little bump right there? So this bump on the material, that is bump specifically for diffuse. This means if you guys connect that to the diffuse bump, and let's say you start making it shiny too, you give it like a clear coat, you'll notice that the texture looks bumpy, but there's a smooth reflection. because you can make bump individually for any material property in here. Can you think of any situation where you'd want bumpy texture color but a smooth reflection? Yeah, like if you had like let's say you're doing, it's a rainy day, you have like the pavement, which is really gritty texture color, all bumpy, but you want to make that smooth reflective puddle on top of it. That would be a perfect example of that. Anything with a clear coat, like if you took the pulley, dipped it in like polyurethane, you might want the reflection on the top to be smooth, but internally the color file beneath the clear coat is bumpy. Now, for what we're doing, we're not going to be dipping this thing in polyurethane. We're not doing that. What we want is we just need to make a bump connection that affects the whole material. I want everything to react to bump. So what you guys need to do is scroll down a little bit through the list of attributes. We're going to skip past a lot of this stuff. And then you're looking for the globals area. Globals, just by the name, this means it's globally affecting everything. This is the whole material. So if you connect that bump into this guy, as we get farther into the class, like for Monday, this will cause your highlights to be bumpy, everything. This is bump for everything. So when you guys connect bump, like find your globals bump on the material, globals bump, it's pretty far down near the bottom. When you middle mouse drag this to connect it, so middle mouse drag your bump ramp, that node, and when you drag it, watch what happens when I drag it into the box. See how it says pulley bump? Do you see any connection? Oh, it's gone. Well, that's wonderful. Let's do that again. I hate you, Maya. So, exactly. So the whole thing, when you drag to a text box, because a lot of these attributes are like text fields where you can type stuff in, it won't connect until you hit enter. And now it's connected. Let me back up. Let's try this again. What happens if I middle mouse drag onto the bump name? I'm dragging on the name bump, not the text box. See how it's connecting? There's a problem though. Do you know what's missing? Because it's connecting. What? You know what? Let's render it. We got bump in there. This is going to look awesome. I'm going to hit re-render. Oh man, that is looking good. Everyone getting black? Sweet. What's that? Yeah, we have a black hole. We've created a link to the nether realm. So the reason it's not showing up is because there's one key node that didn't pop in here when we connected it. Normally, when you connect bump, it just works. Because with the Maya material, remember how it makes that bump 2D node? That just pops in there automatically. Or if you're doing a normal map, the bump 2D node shows up. This isn't making the bump 2D node. That's the problem. So let's make that ourselves. Nope, it didn't do it that way either. Drag. Did anyone get the bump 2D? Did all you guys notice it went black? It didn't do anything? Like, it's connecting, but it's not making that extra node. I'll show you what I mean. Like, let's say we had a Lambert. Let's try that again. So here's you guys back in like 3DF or something. Like, I got a Lambert. We're going to connect it to bump. This guy, right? That always creates automatically because it's a Maya material. The RenderMan one just doesn't know it needs to make it. So it's not doing that for you. It's really not a big deal. It's still easy to make it. All you have to do is just remember, before you connect it to bump, you need to make the bump 2D node. So hit tab, type in bump 2D, and make that guy. Here it is. There's the bump 2D. Now I want to connect this texture to the bump 2D node. And there's only two options here. I mean, this is kind of hard to mess this one up. Let me try color. Nope. Alpha works. Now, does anyone know why this one's not working? Because I can tell you this is not because Maya is smart. Maya is not intelligent enough to know why this isn't working. Wait, say it again? Right, yeah, because I started here with alpha, right? Yeah. Um, that's not really why it's not working. It's because when you start connecting attributes together, you have to start really thinking about what this attribute is. So how many channels is an alpha channel? It's black to white, yeah, but how many channels is alpha? Uh, color is 3, yeah. Alpha is just one channel. So it's one channel connecting to one attribute. What about color? How many channels make up color? Yeah, see how color has a plus next to it is RGB. So you have to kind of remember when you start connecting stuff, if you grab one of these guys that's called color or value, when you can tell there are 3 attributes in it, like this has RGB. Imagine taking 3 different plugs. You're going to plug in something to a socket. You're grabbing 3 plugs at once and trying to jam them into the same outlet. That's what's happening right now. It's like you're taking RGB and trying to shove it into something that can't take 3 connections. It can take 1 connection. Now, color works because color does work if you connect it to another attribute that has color. Because like our original texture file was out color, right? That's 3 channels. Because it went into an attribute, that is 3 channels. So basically what we're getting at here is when you're connecting stuff, Maya wants to do the same number of outputs and inputs. 3 to 3, 2 to 2, 1 to 1. That's all it's asking for. So just do out alpha to bump value. Okay, now connect the bump 2D node to that global bump attribute. And I would recommend just dragging it on the name bump. Now let's try rendering it. Hit R and render it again. Let's see if we get some bump. You guys seeing bump? Holy moly. Well, it's not black. That's a good start. I'm going to say, yeah, that's working. This looks terrible, but it's, yeah. Let's maybe tone it back a little bit. I mean, congratulations, we got the connection working, but man, that looks ridiculous. So right now, just because of the way we connected it, and I haven't told it to be like less intense for bump, this looks like this pulley was like chiseled out of the side of a mountain. Like it's not. It's not stone. It's not concrete. This is supposed to be a little smoother than that. So what I need to do is go to the bump node and then ease back the intensity of the bump. And I know you guys have all done this before, but click on your bump 2D and imagine you're in the lab, you're comparing it to the reference. You just want to kind of get your bump depth to kind of feel like it's about the same amount of bump as the reference image. So this was with 0 bump, that's with 1. What do you guys think you want to do for a number? 0.45? We'll cut it in half. I love it. Here's me going to the bump 2D node, taking the bump depth, doing 0.5, and I'll render it again. Yeah, and even that, you can use the little arrows over here. If you use your arrow keys, you can go up and down and kind of see what's changing. Here was 1, here's 0.5. It's better. I think even that's a little bit too intense. So maybe we'll say, yeah, like 0.2, 0.25. You're just kind of playing around with that thing until it feels like each material has the right bump. Do it again, and now it's going to be even less bump. Do you guys have any questions about the bump part? I feel pretty straightforward. The hard part, obviously, is getting the little duplicated file to do the out alpha into the ramp to turn it black and white. But that's really like the only thing you have to do, and then you just connect it into the materials bump. And you're going to be balancing the bump intensity, the bump depth, and how bright the texture file is. You're just trying to get this to be as close to the reference as possible. right here. I just renamed it pulley bump, but that is my ramp. And I'll do it again for you guys on another object a little bit quicker. Because we're taking our time doing it because I'm explaining every step. This whole thing we did here, once you get used to it, that's like a minute worth of work. It's just the first time you guys have done this. But this goes by really quick the more you get into this stuff. And you can script all this, by the way. If you guys are good at scripting, you can automate this whole setup if you wanted to. That's talk to Clavin about that. Yeah, he'll help you out with that. This is in the recording. Mike Clavin, you will help them with scripting. All right. Yeah, he the dude's like a mad scientist with scripts. So let me do this again with this guy, because I have that texture in there again. I'll show you like the whole process from start to finish, but just a little bit faster. So here's me doing the wooden pulley. These are both pulleys, actually. Here's the other guy. What I'm going to do is zoom in. I'm going to make a new tab. I'm going to call this, I guess, wood material. And we're going to make our Pixar surface, which, again, you can also make through the little menu up here. Pixar surface. I'll name this wood material. We'll go over here, scroll up. There's our color. Hit the connection on color. Make a file. Now, I'm going to kind of have you guys kind of walk me through this, because you're all pros now. And let's load in our texture file. It's in the source image. That's going to go on the material. So from here, like now that I've kind of made the material and just got that basic texture connection, what would I do from here? Like what would be my next step? Right. Exactly. File node. Attributes at the top. Render man. Add texture control. What do we do down here? Bam. Linearize sRGB on. Okay. What would be next? Well, potentially I'd like darken it or lighten it, right, based on the reference. We're not looking at reference, but you guys would use the color gain to make it lighter and darker until it feels about right. What would happen after that? Yeah, so click on that, edit, duplicate with connections, right? So we have that duplicate. There we see it? Yeah. See what happened? That's what I'm talking about. It just popped. Thank you, Maya. Okay, we have our duplicate. What do I do on this guy? Yeah, I got to make a ramp. Right. So we're making a ramp texture, but yeah, you said over here under the render man to turn that off, right? Okay. We're going to delete that. So now what? Yep. To V coordinate. And by the way, the only reason we're doing V coordinate is because by default, this is a V ramp. I'm sure you guys were kind of, some of you may have thought, like, why did we just use U? Like, what's the difference between them? So see the texture that shows up right here? Watch what happens if I put this in U coordinate. Anytime. Really? Come on. Oh, there we go. It was kind of stuck. Oh, no. Don't you do it, Maya. Oh, there. Okay. Woo. Save immediately. You like how when that pinwheel comes up, we all just like step away and just hold our breath for a second? All right. So see how it went black all by doing U? And you know what the V coordinate means? Like what V is doing? V is a vertical ramp, bottom to top. U is side to side. So if you had picked a U ramp, the U coordinate actually will work. Oh, sorry. I'm forgetting one thing. Remember that right there, that guy? On that file node, hit alpha's luminance. See how the texture shows up? So it's a U coordinate if you do it that way, if it's a U ramp. If it's a V ramp, by default, you have to use V coordinate. That's the only reason we're doing that.
So U is left and right.
Yeah, U is, yeah, exactly. If you didn't have this thing in here, just look at the ramp. Vertical, and if it's U, it's just side to side. So you plug into whatever one you happen to have it set to up at the top. In our case, V. All right, what's next? Yeah. Yeah, you got it. Bump 2D. Bump 2D. Okay, we rename this wood bump. Okay, now what? Yep, out alpha. Bump value. And now what?
Why are we using global instead of like a bump area?
Well, this is bump. Are you talking about the one? Yeah. Global, this area, globals, just means this, whatever you do here is affecting all the material properties. So if we have bump in here, it'll make, if I had, let's say we were using glass, the glass would be bumpy. It would make the clear coat bumpy. But if I only had it in the bump under diffuse, this would only affect the diffuse, not the rest of it.
Then you said when you had, so when would you not want to put under the
Just if you had a material where for some reason you thought that you would maybe want like a bumpy reflection, but you don't want the color underneath to be bumpy. It kind of gets into more of those like layered type of textures where there's like stacks of something where they have different bump effects on different parts. Yeah, it's like a layering thing, I think, more than anything else. But for what we're doing, you guys were talking about bringing that to bump. That's it. We just did it again. We're already done. See? Oh, we forgot the most important part. Assign it to the object. I don't want it to be pink again. Let's put that on there. And let's just kind of find out what happened. Now, you know how when we keep rendering, how we lost all that other stuff every time we do a cropped re-render? Do you guys remember how we fixed that? How you can still see other parts of the image even when you re-render it? Okay, let me show you this again. Because I know that's annoying for some of you guys. Like, I want to see the other stuff. Yeah, exactly. It's setting it as a background. So let's back up here. Let's say we didn't have any images in here. I'm just going to do like a full render. I'm going to go through the render cam. I'm going to hit the render current frame. It's going to do the entire thing. There it is. And the texture's already working. That's good. That's pretty awesome. Okay, well now let me kind of cancel it. Now if from here, if I did the crop again and hit R, see how we lose that, right? Let me hit escape. I don't want to lose that every time I hit R. So the only thing you're going to change is if you want it to keep the rest of that on the image, that test render, just cancel it after it's got about 5% finished, just so it even looks like this. On that image, hit that button right there, toggle background. See that little icon to the left? What happens? It's like turning blue. When you see it turn blue, now if I hit R, it keeps that as the starting backplate, and it will always be there when you re-render it. And then this is basically the point where if you guys had the reference in the image tool, you're just comparing like how bright is the texture, is the bump too intense, and then you just go back to those attributes and kind of play around with it until it looks like you've got a pretty good match. But for something like wood, that amount of bump actually kind of looks cool, so I might want that. It's a little intense there, but it's not bad. Okay. How do you guys feel just about like the material so far? Just like making it, getting the color connections, getting the bump and black and white stuff. This should be a pretty easy one for you. It's just the first time you've seen it. And then what we're gonna do on Monday, if you guys do a really good job with this thing, obviously kick off a high quality render like you did with the lighting project, save it. So that's part of your turn in. And then on Monday, we're gonna pick up with this thing and then add a ton of reflections and things on top of the surface and start getting into all those different specularity controls. Clear coat, we're going to do metals, index of refraction, and we're going to start looking into the material presets. Like all these little, I showed you this way back in the first lecture, all those different materials that RenderMan comes with. We're going to start playing around with some of those. All right. So we are done pretty early again. Escape. Yeah, your question? Not yet. Yeah, we'll come up when we do that. When we start doing layering, that'll pop up. All right, you guys are all set. We'll stop the recording. I'm going to get this